A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they got together, and to disconcert him, one of them put a question: "Master, which is the greatest commandment of the law?" Jesus said, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second resembles it. You must love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets also." This is the gospel of the Lord. "85 words, which contain more than enough wisdom, insight, to open our minds and to break the cycle of violence, to break the self-delusion, to break the tyranny of the ego, which we are all only too aware of in these painful days of violence. As I was hearing so much about Gaza in the news, I remembered a saint I hadn't, a writer, a monk of the 6th century that I hadn't read or studied very much, but Saint Dorotheus of Gaza. And his teaching is very simple and practical. Apparently he wouldn't teach as long as his own master was alive. And when he died, he began to speak. And his teaching was there not to create a great philosophy or a great theory, but to help his fellow monks, to help them deal with the problems and obstructions that, of course, we all find and are well aware of on our spiritual journey. Simple teaching. Everything that happens, however insignificant, he says, occurs through God's providence, which is the basis of our ability to accept what happens, however awful, however shocking, however surprising. Without that acceptance, even of our own shadow side, that human beings and we ourselves can be capable of things that we don't agree with or things that shock us, that accepting that is the first step to transcendence. And he says also about anger, very important issue for Gaza and the world at this moment, anger. That if we get angry with someone without, even with cause or without cause, we are, in a sense, elevating ourselves into a superior position. We've lost that art of understanding, feeling our oneness with others. Understandable, but also that is what happens when anger overwhelms us. And he asks this question also concerning anger. It's sometimes possible that people who hurt us can make us angry just for a short time, but we let it go because we like that person. Think of how many marriages go through this and communities go through this every day. But if we are hurt by someone who we don't like, then it's much more likely that our anger is going to build on that pre-existent hatred or distaste or rejection of that person, and then the anger overwhelms us and we can't control it. So thank you, Saint Dorotheus of Gaza, and may you pray for us and the people of Gaza, the innocent civilians who are victims of unrestrained anger at the moment. In the gospel today, these 85 words of Jesus have a context, like everything in life, like the terrible situation in Palestine, in Gaza, like the attack, the awful, brutal, vicious attack of Hamas upon innocent Israelis that led to this, and has repeated the history of the cycle of violence that we have known since the time of Cain. So there's a context to this gospel. Jesus is being tricked. They're trying to trick him, to catch him out in the way that maybe a journalist might today while doing an interview with someone, or a way in which we try to pull down and humiliate or embarrass somebody in the public eye. And in all of his responses to these trick questions and to these deceitful approaches to him, Jesus ignores the trickery, really, or he just steps wisely and elegantly through it or over it, sometimes by turning the question back on the questioner. But basically by telling the truth. He tells the truth. He's not caught in the trickery, which would mean that his own ego would be wrestling with the ego of the negative person, questioning him. But he is able to tell the truth from that pure place in himself. And what does he say in answer to this trick question, but a question that was often raised in religious conversation at that time? What is the greatest of the commandments? And he points out the unity of the two great commandments of the love of God and the love of neighbor. The love of God is the Shema. The Lord your God is one. You must love the Lord your God with your whole heart. And this is as close as the Jewish tradition comes to a creed. But the love of neighbor is deeply rooted in the Jewish and biblical wisdom as well. In Leviticus chapter 19, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So this is a commandment from the mouth of God himself, not a moral interpretation, but direct teaching in the biblical wisdom. And Jesus's teaching is always true to the essence of biblical wisdom. In the book of Exodus, we're told, do not molest your neighbor. Do not molest the stranger. Care for the widows, the strangers, and the orphans. And somewhere else, I think in Leviticus, it says, leave your, when you do the harvest and the olives and the grapes and whatever, don't take every single grape or every single olive away. Leave some on the ground or leave some on the vines for people who are hungry, people who will need it. So there is, at the essence of the biblical wisdom, this understanding of the unity between the love of God and the love of neighbor. As Christian interpreters reflected on this over the millennia, they came to the insight, many of them, that Evagrius, one of the great desert fathers, came to, that love of neighbor is the love of God. There is no complementarity. One is the same as the other. They are as inseparable as body, mind, and spirit in the human person. And the love of neighbor is the love of God, because what we are loving in our neighbor is the image of God, the recognition of ourself in the neighbor, even in our enemy. We can recognize ourselves in the other, because the image of God that I am, if I'm looking at that person from the right perspective, if the eye of the heart is looking at that person, then I, as the image of God, am recognizing the image of God in the other person. So each person that I meet, each person that I know, is a mirror that in which I and the other person recognize each other as one in the image and likeness of God. Now that might sound very theological and abstract and mystical, but it's common sense. If we hurt another person, we hurt ourselves. And we create through the law of karma that also governs the universe. It's a less powerful law than the law of grace, the law of love, but it is a functioning law that what I do is going to have consequences, good or bad. If I react with violence, with hatred, if I overreact especially, then there will be consequences to pay. The Jewish people have understood this desperately, painfully over millennia through the persecution that they have suffered. Hitler tried to exterminate the Jews because they were, in his deluded and perverted mind, the enemy of humanity. And if he had won the war, he probably might have succeeded even. But he failed because hatred always destroys itself. I visited Auschwitz years ago, and when first time I visited, I noticed the administration block in Auschwitz had been destroyed by the Nazis as they were leaving, hoping to destroy evidence of what they had done. But it was left wisely as a sign that evil, the shadow side when it overwhelms us, eventually destroys itself, not before it has done an immense amount of damage and created many, many years of karmic and traumatic damage to succeeding generations. So let's come back to this teaching. The love of neighbor is the love of God, because we love the image of God in our neighbor if we can see them. And contemplation and action reflect the same unity. The love of God, as it were, reflects the meaning of contemplation, but that overflows inevitably into action, which is the love of neighbor. They are intertwined. There is a fundamental unity at the heart of reality. And this is why we imitate what we love. This is a great mystery. Maybe the word is emulate, but we can talk about the meaning of the words later. To imitate means just to copy, but to emulate means that we learn from what we see, and we can even improve what we see. We can even go beyond what we see when we emulate. But let's just say imitation is enough. We imitate what we love. Maybe we could say we become what we love. And this is reflected in another passage in the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 25, often called the Last Judgment, when he separates the sheep from the goats. And we hear the comment of both sides. When did we feed you when you were hungry? When did we visit you when you were sick? And Jesus' reply is, if you did this to anyone, you did it to me. There's that fundamental unity at the heart of reality, which Jesus himself manifests through his own nature. So this is why we have to love our enemy, because we are one with our enemy. And as long as we attack, hate, take vengeance, try to destroy our enemy, then we are doing damage to ourselves and everyone around us. And that's why that golden rule at the heart of all spiritual, religious ethics and morality is so universal. Do not do unto others what you do not want them to do unto you. As I was reflecting on this, the news broke of another mass shooting in the United States, in Maine. There have been more than 560 mass shootings in the States, perpetrated by individuals who have gone over the top, who have lost touch with knowing what they are doing. More than 3,000 people have died in the United States because of the gun laws, which allow that terrible pattern to continue and perpetuate itself. So that's the context in which we gather today to praise God, to be reminded of this unity of the first commandment and the one that is equal to the first commandment, the love of God and the love of neighbor. And we need these reminders. So I'll end with a bit of good news. Well, this is good news. But the good news is, you may remember during COVID, I was often referring to a beautiful white heron or white egret in the lake here at Bonneau. And it was there day after day after day, just standing there as it seemed to me, a reminder of the divine presence through the terrible crisis we were going through. And it's back. It's back with a vengeance, because the other day we were sitting having a community meeting and looked out of the window, and we saw a great flock of these white herons, probably on migration to Egypt or wherever they go, landing on the lawn just outside my room. And but there's a solitary one in the lake still, so I don't know how long he'll be there. But we have these vivid reminders that call us back to hope and to joy in the capacity of human beings, not only to fail and to be inhuman, but also to learn. And the more of those white egrets who learn through their own experience and through their practice, their contemplative practice and their love of one another, the more, the better, and the more hope there is that we can break the cycle of delusion and violence that has kept us entrapped for so long.